Hey, welcome everybody to our third installment of the God in the Manger devotional, the Bonhoeffer devotional. Joined here by Zach, and this is Chaz. How are you doing, Zach?
Doing all right today. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. Doing
I,
pretty good. Just
I'm ready for
yeah,
this spring in December to be back to just normal December. But other than that,
yes. I was really hoping we might get some snow before the end of the year, but I'm not hopeful. I'm not hopeful. Um, I'll be waiting for something else.
see what you did
um,
there.
um,
Maybe
but
there'll be
yeah,
some
so
redemption in the temperature in this.
perhaps.
Oh
So
Lord.
yeah, I think so. This week we're moving into week three, which, as Zach already teased out for us, is on the topic of redemption. And so we're coming out of talking about waiting and talking about mystery, and now we're moving to talking about redemption. And so, Zach, with this week, with the devotionals sort of set for this week, what things really stood out to you about the topic of redemption?
Well, you know what really sort of jumped out to me at first was I love how they give us all those little citations, and
Hmm.
it seems like for the past 2 weeks we've really been getting a lot of Bonhoeffer's sort of later works within like 2-3 years of his death. But looking at the citations this week, they're all like really early Bonhoeffer.
Hmm.
Like I think the earliest one we have is like 1928, and then there's a couple like there's 32, 33, and that's I was sort of wondering because, and I've heard people say this, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but Bonhoeffer truly has an evolution of thought through
Yeah.
his his works, and I was wondering if you could not take us on too deep of a rabbit hole, but sort of contextualize some of the stuff that he's talking about here in his early works in sort of that sort of
Hmm.
flow of where he gets to.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll attempt to not go too deep into Alice in Wonderland. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think what is interesting about the earlier quotes that you mentioned is a lot of these are from his a lot of these quotes are from his sermons when he is doing when he is serving as a pastor. And so what's interesting is he's serving as a pastor not in Germany. So he's, at least for some of these, so he's pastoring a German church in Barcelona, Spain, for some of this. And I think there's actually another book of collections of just his Christmas sermons, and a few of those are pulled of the quotes for this week are pulled from that book. And what I think makes that interesting is you're hearing, as opposed to him writing from a prison cell, which we've gotten some of those so far, and there's some of that in this week as well. We're getting him really preaching this sermon, or preaching this idea of Advent to a congregation, while he's sort of figuring out how to serve them, and figuring out what it means to be, very much learning how to be a pastor at some of these earlier stages. Um, and he's really taking these ideas that he developed, because he had this really in-depth academic work. He did two dissertations and some academic pieces, and then really one of the things that really shines in all of those is this focus on finding Jesus, finding Christ in the midst of community, and that Christ comes to us, and sort of breaks into our reality. And I think you see some of that, like you see some of that in, very much how, like, that frames his idea of Advent. That Advent is this, we talked about waiting, we talked about mystery, but there's also this thing to where we are in a place to where Jesus comes to us, um, and then becomes this sort of traveling companion with us. But he's very much talking about the need that we have for Christ to break into our lives. Um, and I think that becomes a big theme for him throughout his work, but we see that in his early stuff, as he's sort of, specifically preaching these ideas, as opposed to writing to friends and letters and stuff.
It's interesting that you use that. You used it twice, just in what you were saying there. That idea of in breaking,
Hmm.
and that's sort of I want to. We've been doing this thing of picking an image to sort of frame our discussion, and I want to do that again this week. And the image that I want to use is the one that he uses in day 4, and he talks about the person who works in the mine who then all of a sudden the mind collapses in on and doesn't kill him, but he knows that he's trapped there.
Mm-hmm.
And, talking about in-breaking, he goes on to discuss what happens, the initial phase of just realizing that there's nothing that he can do. And then what starts to happen whenever he hears perhaps help starting to knock through.
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that I think is really, just as a more of a side note, is I think it's really neat to see the way in which a pastor is using current events to because he's referencing something that happened, in their community, which I think
says
just,
we all know what this is like, because we've all been reading about this and hearing about this.
Yeah, and I find that is just a little bit of a side note. I think is really interesting to see somebody from a different time, different context, different everything, but the way in which this idea of connecting the ideas of of Scripture and of Christ to whatever's going on, there's an applicability there, and I think that's really interesting. But on this, I think why he picks out this theme of being this miner being trapped is I think it speaks to sort of the position from which we're waiting, that we're not waiting from some sort of neutral position, but there is this sense of we're in need of something, and that there is some kind of barrier, but that knocking is always present, right? And that's really what he's sort of picking up on this, and connecting it to Advent is we may be in this mine or in this cave, but we can hear that knocking, and I think that's where he in that same day he picks up. It's a quote from Luke 21:28. Bonhoeffer quotes it, and they put it in the devotional. It says, "Now when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your hands, because your redemption is drawing near." And so I think he connects this Advent with redemption in the fact that part of what we're waiting for is someone to sort of be our companion out of the cave, so to speak, to be the one who who comes to us, but then we travel with out of that moment. And
I don't know if you can hear, I have Hattie Rose is wanting to get in on this conversation as well. So what I find interesting about that thought is then, it's only the in-breaking that actually has the effect. In theory, the miner could, bang on the rocks and try to move stuff out of the way. But at some point there comes the realization that it's only through the in-breaking and somebody coming into me, or coming to get me, that's where how that redemption takes place.
And I think for Bonhoeffer, it's really important when we connect that it's Jesus, that it's Christ doing this in-breaking, that we always that means we see that through the idea that this isn't. It's not like a Superman coming to save us, but it is the person of Jesus coming to save us, and that we should never lose the humanity of God that has to be part of that moment of salvation, of redemption.
Yeah, and it seems like we do have, and I don't know if this is an American Christian thing or just Christianity in general. It seems like we almost, this is going to sound horrible. This is almost heretical, but it seems like we do have a desire to only focus on the sensationalism that we have, in Jesus. Jesus comes down from heaven to go back up to heaven after he dies for the sake of my soul. God's Son, all that sort of stuff, and we do sort of miss out on what Bonhoeffer's trying to point to, and what this whole devotion is trying to point to, is that the salvation is lying in the form of a baby in a manger. And if perhaps it's an invitation for us to sort of reconnect then with the human side.
Yes, and I think it's important to realize too what that to me it really connects with why Bonhoeffer is the specifically sort of Lutheran idea of Christ still being present in, like, specifically in the sacrament of communion, right, is something that makes Lutheran doctrine unique, and I think Moravians sort of follow in that. But just in general, this idea that Christ still remains present in an active way is, I think, really important, because it's not it helps us to realize that the incarnation and Advent is not an event that sort of that took place that we reflect back on, but it speaks to a continuous nature. And the same thing's true with redemption, I think, for this week. Like, it's not like the image of the miner isn't to sort of say, like, well, we get out of the cave and then we're good. In some ways, we are both always in the cave and always out of the cave at the same time, in some kind of weird, and that's where the sort of the mystery paradoxical part of faith comes in. Like, there is this, we are always the miner in the cave, listening for the knocking, and Christ is always there with us, walking us out at the same time.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because we do seem to be consumed of this idea of, once we have, a relationship with Jesus, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, everything sort of changes. In a way that's true, but at the same time, the constant need for that continual relationship and that continual, sorry, she's learning to roll over as we speak, as enamored with that. But anyway, this constant need to have that that consistent inbreaking is something that perhaps we need to really sort of latch onto as a Christian community, and not just get focused on the once and done, change sort of thing. So,
and I think yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, wow, we said we weren't gonna get into a rabbit hole, and here we are.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. Take us out of it, and then I'll move us on.
No, yeah, I was just gonna, I think those are ideas that are so important to remember, to keep faith always moving, and that, I think, is Advent is an interesting time to use the pause and the sort of like waiting moment to realize where to think about where we're going next. So anyway, yeah, I just think that's always an important part of faith.
So, Chaz, were there certain parts of the devotion or certain days, devotional days, that really stood out to you this week?
Yeah, for me, I really appreciated day 4, which we just talked about with the miner. I think was one that stood out to me. Another one was in day 2. This is from an earlier Advent sermon, and this is the end of the Bonhoeffer quote on page 37. It says, "Be my brother in the kingdom of evil and suffering and death." And that may sound like really dark and grim, but I think to me, I connected it to the story of the miner, and it shows who is coming into that mine. That it is our brother in, as our sibling in Christ, which is like a very like Zinzendorf idea too.
Well, you could even take it a step further in that here's another miner who knows what you're going through, who's breaking into the mine.
Yeah, and it gives a sense of realness and materiality, like, right, that faith isn't something that is ethereal, that we wait on, that is like outside, that we can't touch and feel, but that, like, if Jesus is our brother in evil, suffering, and death, like we can talk about what those things are tangibly, right? Like, and it doesn't take long to realize, especially right now, and like what those tangible things are. Like, we've had the single highest days of death from COVID in the United States. We are seeing, we've had I know for us personally, like we've known people who have died from it, right? Like I'm sure you also who are watching this know the people who have died from it. And that's just and that's just COVID, right? And that's not to mention the everyday suffering that exists separate from COVID. You know, the heartbreaks, the broken relationships, the just the every other part of life. That I think when Jesus becomes our brother in those things, when he becomes our sibling in the midst of that, we realize that it's not meant to put blinders on us or to sort of like Jesus becomes this numbing agent that allows us to not think about it, but really becomes, no, I want to be with you through it. And I think that's I don't know, that's something we constantly need, at least for me, I constantly need to be retold that.
Well, and that's why I really loved day one, because it adds another element of what you're saying, and it's that element of, there's suffering that we all sort of go through, and we all sort of realize that, as humans we do that. But day one really talks about the stuff that we don't want other people to know that we deal with. And he points out that we all have that, and we can hide it, or I even said, we can justify that to anybody on the planet, but Jesus is, does it, Jesus sort of sees through that. And then that's when you read that on day one, you're sort of like, man, yeah, wow, I feel awful because, I have this. And then that's the beauty of that's the beauty of redemption, is that when you consider what he talks about in day two, that's the stuff that Jesus is, that's the humility of Jesus right there, is that's the stuff that Jesus wants to be, our brother in, and, walk with us in, is even that which we want to, to hide. So for me, day one and day two were quite profound.
Yeah. And I think for me, that they really help to set up how this idea of redemption connects into Advent. Because it is something that, perhaps we more closely think of connected to the season of Easter. But to see how that theme and that idea is still very much present in the season of Advent, I thought was really, really, really neat. And to see that present, like you pointed out at the beginning, how that's present in so many parts of Bonhoeffer's life, that he talks about that at a lot of different places.
Yes, I mean, we covered days 1, 2, and 4 pretty well. Was there anything else that the days of the week that really jumped out to you that you wanted to highlight for us today?
I mean, those were the main ones that stood. I mean, I could talk about almost any of them, honestly, but those were the main ones that stood out to me. Was there any other ones for you that really you wanted to emphasize?
No, man. Like day 1 and day 2, that's enough to sort of chew on, and just sort of, it's interesting to me, like, and I almost feel overwhelmed sometimes when talking about faith and talking about, theology, and talking about, all the stuff that, that there is to talk about in church and in a life of faith. And for me, there are always just a couple of things that we sort of keep coming back to. And that then day 1 and day 2 are so important to me.
For sure.
And then to sort of take it like on a step, and maybe we could say that this is sort of, maybe this is where Bonhoeffer gets to later on in his life, is that, so then what, because of that, that Jesus, comes to you even in the places that you don't want anybody to know about, and, is there with you. And perhaps that's the mind, that's the thing that we're encapsulated by, is all the stuff that we don't want anybody to know about. And that's what needs in breaking in. And so Jesus does that for you. So then what? And then maybe that, that core idea is what inspires movement on your part forward. I'm going to, I'm going to try to do something for the sake of other people because of what Jesus does for me.
Yeah. And I think that is, and I think that's what, again, that's sort of like we talk about sort of propelling forward, right? Like that's what keeps this thing in motion, is realizing that, because if we really think about what it means for Christ to be our brother in the midst of all of these things, it very much will affect how we see other people and how we interact with other people, and what it means, how we treat other people, how we treat, how we orient our society, how we, all of those things, how it begins to, it has to start with this idea of, Christ as this brother, this traveling companion, and, and then it moves out and affects every aspect of life.
Yeah, and it also sort of perhaps adds another level of redemption. Redemption is not just redemption of your of your soul. Redemption is also that which you do with your life.
Yeah, and the ways that we redeem our work and our hands and our, like, the work, like everything becomes, it's not just like redemption as an idea of this thing was dirty and then I cleaned it up, but like this redemption becomes this creation of wholeness and harmony.
Yeah, I dig it. Well, so if there's nothing else that, anything in the days we want to highlight, all right, can you tie it together for us? We started off with waiting, we did mystery, now we're in redemption. Tie it all together.
I can try to. We'll see how well it works. I think throughout all of this, in an interesting way, these three have built on each other, because I think if we didn't really think about waiting and we didn't really think about mystery, then we wouldn't know the kind of redemption to which we are waiting for. And I think that's part of the beauty of Advent, and why the idea of darkness is so important to Advent. Because it's in the winter, it's in this wintering time, this time of more introspection, of things are colder, we're inside, like should be colder at least, but we're inside more.
Yeah, you can tell he wrote all this is coming out of a German mindset, because it gets cold,
right?
Not
Winston-Salem winter. And so these all of these things play into this idea of Advent, that we have to be in this mindset of waiting, but what we're waiting on is mysterious. It's not like we're waiting on something that we can fully understand, and we are waiting from a position of needing to answer that knocking on the door. And so we have to get through the waiting and the mystery before we get to the redemption.
Yeah, I like it. Well, I think I really do think that, like, this week has been really cohesive for me, and I really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed all the weeks, but this one sort of, it's almost like, as we move through Advent, we are starting to see that light breaking.
For sure.
That comes through in this week. So.
For sure.
Well, we'd like to thank y'all so much for walking with us in this journey. I know several of y'all have reached out to me to just say that you're following along. So encourage you to please like the video, share the video. If you have any questions, comment on the video for us, or reach out to one of us, and we'll be happy to talk about it in the next video. And I hope that y'all are getting something out of this, because I know Chaz and I, we have our little talk afterwards, and we're like, wow, we enjoyed that conversation. We hope the same is true for y'all as well.
Yeah, it's been good. And like I said, it's been good to see the comments on the videos. Leave more of those, leave questions, and look forward to when we do this again.
Hope y'all have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to y'all later.
Bye.
See ya.